The grand throne room of the Zephyrian Empire sparkled with crystal formations that grew from the walls like frozen lightning. Princess Lyralii sat on her smaller throne beside her mother, the Empress, watching the daily court proceedings with barely concealed boredom. Her forearms were crossed in different positions, showing her irritation, while her silver skin caught the light from the floating orbs above. Then, the doors opened, and everything changed. A human walked in. Not just any human, but one who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too many battles and lived to tell about them. His name was Marcus Chen, and he wore simple black clothing that somehow looked more impressive than the jeweled robes of the nobles around him. His dark hair was cut short, military style, and his brown eyes swept the room like a scanner checking for threats. Lyralii had heard stories about humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were the newcomers, the species that had somehow managed to fight off 3 different alien invasions in the past century. The species that never gave up, never surrendered, and had a disturbing habit of winning fights they should have lost. But she had never seen one up close. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus said, giving a respectful bow that was neither too deep nor too shallow. "I am Marcus Chen, representing the Terran Defense Coalition. I'm here to discuss the trade agreement between our peoples." The Empress nodded graciously. "Welcome to Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Chen. We are honored by your presence." But Lyralii wasn't interested in boring trade talks. She was much more interested in testing this famous human endurance everyone talked about. As the formal discussions began, she started small. A little telekinetic push to make his water glass slide across the table. Marcus simply caught it without looking and continued talking about shipping lanes and tariff rates. Frustrated that he didn't react, Lyralii tried harder. She used her powers to make his chair wobble slightly. Marcus adjusted his posture seamlessly and kept discussing mineral rights. When she made the temperature in his area drop by 10 degrees, he didn't even shiver. "Is something wrong, Princess?" Marcus asked suddenly, turning to look directly at her with those sharp brown eyes. "You seem restless." Lyralii felt her silver cheeks flush purple with embarrassment. How had he noticed? She had been so careful. "I'm just curious about humans," she said, trying to sound casual. "I've heard such interesting stories." "What kind of stories?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his tone that made her think he already knew exactly what kind of stories. "Oh, Lyralii said with a smile that showed her pointed teeth. "Stories about how humans never know when to quit. How you throw yourselves at impossible odds and somehow win. How you're either very brave or very stupid, and nobody can tell which." Several of the Zephyrian nobles gasped at her rudeness, but Marcus just laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that filled the throne room. "Those stories are all true, Princess. Though I'd argue it's usually both brave and stupid at the same time." This wasn't the reaction Lyralii had expected. She had wanted to make him angry, to see the famous human temper everyone whispered about. Instead, he seemed amused by her rudeness. It was infuriating. Over the next few days, as the trade negotiations continued, Lyralii made it her personal mission to get under Marcus's skin. She had her servants deliver his meals late, hoping to see him lose his patience. Instead, Marcus simply waited politely and thanked them when the food finally arrived. She arranged for his quarters to be too hot, then too cold, then filled with the scent of Zephyrian spice flowers that most offworlders found overwhelming. Marcus adapted to each change without complaint. When she challenged him to a game of strategy that most aliens found impossible to master, Marcus studied the rules for 20 minutes and then proceeded to beat her soundly in 3 straight games. When she suggested a physical challenge, thinking surely the heavier gravity of Zephyr Prime would slow him down, Marcus completed the obstacle course faster than most Zephyrian soldiers. "You're not very good at this," Marcus told her after she had tried to embarrass him by asking detailed questions about human mating habits in front of the entire court. He had answered each question with scientific precision and absolutely no embarrassment whatsoever. "Good at what?" Lyralii demanded. "Whatever it is you're trying to do," Marcus said. "If you want to make me angry, you'll need to try harder. If you want to make me quit, you're wasting your time. And if you're just trying to figure out what makes humans tick, you could just ask." Lyralii stared at him. In all her 19 years of life, no one had ever spoken to her so directly. Not her tutors, not the nobles, not even her mother. Everyone always treated her with careful respect because she was the heir to the throne. But this human was talking to her like she was just a person. "Fine," she said, crossing all four arms. "What makes humans so special? Why does everyone in the galaxy act like you're some kind of miracle species?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. The crystal spires of the Zephyrian capital stretched to the horizon, beautiful and ancient and perfect. "We're not special," he said finally. "We're just stubborn. When something tries to kill us, we don't have the option of flying away or teleporting to safety or turning invisible. We can't read minds or manipulate gravity or breathe underwater. All we can do is refuse to die." "That's it?" Lyralii asked. "That's the big secret?" "That's it," Marcus confirmed. "We're the species that's too stupid to know when we're beaten. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough." Lyralii thought about this. She thought about the stories she had heard about Earth's wars. About humans fighting enemies with superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. About humans who kept fighting even when they were wounded, even when they were outnumbered, even when victory was impossible. "Show me," she said suddenly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Show you what?" "Show me what it means to be human. Not in some game or test. Really show me." Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then, he nodded. "All right. But, not here. If you really want to understand, you'll have to come with me." "Come with you where?" "There's a situation developing in the outer system," Marcus said. "Pirates have been raiding the mining stations. Your mother asked for human assistance, but she didn't want to worry you with the details." Lyralii felt a chill run down her spine. Pirates were dangerous, but they were also a fact of life in the galaxy. Most species dealt with them by paying tribute or hiring mercenaries or simply abandoning the areas they couldn't defend. "What are humans going to do about pirates that we can't?" Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since she had met him, there was something cold in his expression. "We're going to remind them why it's a bad idea to attack human allies." The next morning, Lyralii found herself aboard a human warship called the Determination. It was smaller than Zephyrian vessels, built for speed and efficiency rather than comfort. The crew moved with the same quiet confidence as Marcus, and they treated her with polite respect but didn't seem particularly impressed by her royal status. Captain Sarah Martinez was a woman with graying hair and scars on her hands who explained the situation in simple, direct terms. 17 raids in the past month, she said, pointing to spots on a holographic map. They're hitting the outer mining stations, taking what they want, and disappearing. The local defense forces can't catch them. Why not? Lyralii asked. Because they're not trying to catch them, Marcus answered. They're trying to avoid casualties. Noble goal, but it doesn't work against enemies who don't share that priority. And humans don't avoid casualties? Lyralii asked. We avoid unnecessary casualties, Captain Martinez corrected. But, when someone threatens innocent people, we have a different definition of necessary. The ship's sensors detected the pirates 3 hours later. They were attacking another mining station, their ship swarming around the facility like insects around a light. The station's defenses were overwhelmed, and several of the mining ships were already burning in space. Standard pirate tactics, Captain Martinez observed. Hit fast, take what they can carry, leave before help arrives. Except help already has arrived, Marcus said quietly. He turned to Lyralii. This is what you wanted to see. Watch closely. What happened next would stay with Lyralii for the rest of her life. The Determination didn't charge into battle like she expected. Instead, it positioned itself between the pirates and their escape route, cutting off their exit. When the pirates realized they were trapped, they turned their weapons on the human ship. The pirates had superior numbers. Their ships were newer, faster, better armed. By any reasonable calculation, the humans should have retreated or called for reinforcements. Instead, they did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. They attacked. Not just attacked, they charged straight into the middle of the pirate formation with their weapons blazing. The determination took hit after hit, its shields failing, its hull beginning to crack. But it never stopped moving forward, never stopped firing. "They're insane," Lyrelii whispered, watching the tactical display. "They're going to get themselves killed." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But look at what the pirates are doing." Lyrelii looked. The pirates were breaking formation, their ships scattering in all directions. They had been expecting a cautious opponent, someone who would try to minimize their own losses. They weren't prepared for an enemy that was willing to trade damage blow for blow. The Determination's main gun spoke, and one of the pirate ships simply ceased to exist. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small star. The remaining pirates tried to flee, but Captain Martinez had positioned her ship perfectly. Every escape route led past human weapons. "Surrender now and you'll live to see trial," Captain Martinez broadcast on all frequencies. "Continue fighting and you'll die here." The pirates chose surrender. Later, as medical teams tended to the wounded and engineers assessed the damage to the Determination, Lyrelii stood in the observation deck looking out at the rescued mining station. Marcus joined her there, a bandage wrapped around his left arm where shrapnel had caught him. "That was..." she began, then stopped. She didn't have words for what she had just witnessed. "Stupid?" Marcus suggested with a slight smile. "Terrifying," Lyrelii said honestly. "You could have all died." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But we didn't. And now those miners get to go home to their families instead of dying in space. Sometimes the risk is worth it." Lyrelii was quiet for a long moment, watching the rescue ships dock with the station. "Is that really what makes humans special? The willingness to risk everything for strangers?" "I told you," Marcus said. "We're not special. We just refuse to give up. Even when we probably should." As they traveled back to Zephyr Prime, Lyrelii found herself looking at Marcus differently. She had started this as a game, a way to amuse herself by testing the famous human endurance. But, somewhere along the way, it had stopped being a game. She had seen something today that changed how she understood the galaxy. She had seen what it meant to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, no matter the cost. She had seen courage that wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. She had seen why the galaxy whispered about humans in tones of awe and respect and just a little bit of fear. When they arrived back at the palace, Lyrelii's mother was waiting for them in the throne room. The Empress listened to Captain Martinez's report with the same careful attention she gave to all official business. But Lyrelii noticed that her mother's eyes kept drifting to Marcus, and there was something in her expression that the princess couldn't quite identify. "You have our gratitude, Captain Martinez," the Empress said formally. "The Zephyrian Empire does not forget its debts." "No debt, Your Majesty," Captain Martinez replied. "We were protecting our allies." "That's what allies do." After the captain left to see to her ship, the Empress turned to her daughter. "I trust your time with Ambassador Chen was educational, Lyrelii?" Lyrelii felt her cheeks flush purple again. Somehow, her mother always seemed to know more than she let on. "It was enlightening, Mother." "I thought it might be," the Empress said with a slight smile. "Marcus, a word?" But, before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. The crystal formations in the walls pulsed with urgent red light, and Lyrelii could hear the sound of ships landing in the courtyard outside. "What's happening?" Lyrelii demanded. The throne room doors burst open, and Commander Theklos of the Imperial Guard rushed in. His blue skin was pale with fear, and his usually perfect uniform was disheveled. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "we're under attack. The Hegemony fleet, they've bypassed our outer defenses. They're demanding your immediate surrender." The Hegemony. Lyrelii felt ice form in her stomach. The Hegemony was the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy, a coalition of warrior species that had conquered dozens of worlds. They had been pressuring Zephyr Prime for years, making increasingly aggressive demands for tribute and submission. "How many ships?" the Empress asked, her voice deadly calm. 57 capital vessels, Your Majesty. Plus escorts. They have us outnumbered 5-1. Lyralii looked at her mother, then, at Marcus. The human's face had gone completely expressionless, and his hand had moved unconsciously to where a weapon would normally hang. "What are their demands?" Marcus asked quietly. "Complete surrender," Commander Theklos replied. "They want the princess as a hostage to ensure compliance." "And they want..." He glanced nervously at Marcus. "They want all human personnel handed over immediately." "I see," Marcus said, and his voice was so cold it made Lyralii shiver. "And what did you tell them?" We haven't responded yet, Ambassador. We were waiting for Her Majesty's orders." The Empress stood slowly from her throne, her forearms spread wide. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of 1,000 years of royal bloodline. "Send this message to the Hegemony Fleet: the Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with pirates, regardless of how many ships they bring. They have 1 hour to withdraw from our system, or they will be destroyed." Commander Theklos stared at her in shock. "Your Majesty, we cannot possibly fight a fleet that size. Our military is strong, but not strong enough for this." "You're right," the Empress agreed. "Our military is not strong enough." She turned to Marcus with a smile that was both sad and proud. "But we are not fighting alone." Marcus nodded once, and, suddenly, Lyralii understood. This wasn't a coincidence. The timing, the trade negotiations, Marcus's presence here, none of it was coincidental. "You knew this was coming," she said to her mother. "You knew the hegemony would attack." "We had intelligence suggesting it was likely," the Empress confirmed. "That's why I asked the Terran Defense Coalition for assistance. Not just trade assistance. Military assistance," Marcus said. "The kind of assistance that doesn't appear on any official documents." Lyralii felt the world shift around her as the pieces fell into place. The human fleet was already here, somewhere in the system, waiting. The trade negotiations had been a cover. Marcus wasn't just an ambassador. He was here to protect them. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Emergency protocols were activated throughout the palace. The civilian population was moved to underground shelters. The Zephyrian military prepared for a siege they knew they couldn't win. And Marcus made a single, encrypted transmission to a location that didn't appear on any star charts. Lyralii stayed close to her mother throughout the preparations, but she found her eyes constantly drifting to Marcus. He moved through the chaos with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout his visit, coordinating with Zephyrian officers and speaking quietly into his communication device in rapid bursts of human language. "He's not what I thought he was," she said to her mother during a brief quiet moment. "None of them are," the Empress replied softly. "Humans are unique in the galaxy, daughter. Most species see them as primitive or barbaric because they lack our advanced abilities. They cannot manipulate matter with thought or bend reality to their will. They cannot commune with cosmic forces or transcend physical limitations. But..." Lyralii prompted. "But they have something the rest of us have lost," her mother continued. "They have the will to stand against impossible odds, not because they believe they will win, but because they believe the fight itself matters. They understand that some things are worth dying for, even when death is certain." Before Lyralii could respond, the palace shook. The Hegemony fleet had begun their bombardment. Through the crystal walls of the throne room, they could see the night sky filled with fire as enemy weapons struck the planetary shields. The shields held, but everyone knew they wouldn't last forever against that kind of firepower. "Your Majesty," Commander Theklos reported, "the Hegemony commander is demanding an immediate response to their surrender ultimatum." The Empress looked at Marcus. "What is the status of your backup?" Marcus checked his device. "They should be in position in approximately 15 minutes. "And if they're not?" the Empress asked. Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Then, I will defend this palace and everyone in it to my last breath. That's what humans do." Lyralii stared at him. "You can't be serious."
One human against an entire invasion fleet?
I wouldn't be the first human to try, Marcus said with that same slight smile he had shown when she first challenged him.
Besides, who says I'll be alone?
As if summoned by his words, Captain Martinez's voice crackled through the communication system.
Marcus, this is Sarah. We're in position.
All ships report ready.
All ships? Lyralii asked. How many ships did you bring?
Marcus turned to look out at the hegemony fleet hanging in the sky above them, hundreds of vessels that blotted out the stars.
Enough, he said simply.
And, somewhere in the darkness between the worlds, the human fleet began to move.
The first sign that something had changed came when the hegemony's bombardment suddenly stopped.
The night sky, which moments before had been filled with weapon fire striking the planetary shields, went eerily quiet. Through the crystal walls of the throne room, Lyralii could see the massive enemy fleet hanging motionless above the planet like storm clouds waiting to break.
What's happening? Commander Theklos demanded, checking his instruments frantically. Why have they stopped firing?
Marcus was listening to his communication device, his expression growing more satisfied by the second. Because they just realized they're not alone up there. The tactical display in the center of the throne room flickered to life, showing the space around Zephyr Prime in 3 dimensions. The hegemony fleet was clearly visible as red dots arranged in a perfect invasion formation. But, now there were other dots appearing on the display.
Blue dots. Lots of them.
Impossible, Commander Theklos whispered.
Those ships weren't there 5 minutes ago.
Our sensors would have detected them. Human stealth technology, Marcus explained casually.
We've gotten very good at not being seen when we don't want to be seen.
Lyralii stared at the display. The blue dots representing human ships were smaller than the red hegemony vessels, but there were so many of them. They seemed to appear from nowhere, materializing out of empty space around the enemy fleet like hunters emerging from the forest.
How many? The Empress asked quietly.
Marcus consulted his device again.
237 vessels, Your Majesty. Including the 7th Fleet's flagship, the Indomitable. 237 ships, Lyralii repeated in disbelief. You brought an entire fleet to protect us?
We brought several fleets, Marcus corrected.
The 7th Fleet, the 12th Fast Attack Squadron, and the 3rd Expeditionary Force. Plus some special units.
Before anyone could ask what he meant by special units, a new voice filled the throne room. It was being broadcast on all frequencies, speaking in the trade language that every species in the galaxy understood.
Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Terran Defense Coalition.
You are in violation of the Mutual Defense Treaty between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal from this system, or we will consider you hostile combatants. The response came immediately, broadcast from the hegemony flagship in the arrogant tones of someone used to being obeyed. Human vessels, I am Supreme Commander Veltar of the Hegemony 4th Battle Group.
You are vastly outnumbered. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed.
There was a pause. Then, Admiral Torres spoke again, and there was something in her voice that made Lyralii's spine tingle. It was the same cold certainty she had heard in Marcus's voice when he talked about the pirates. Supreme Commander, let me explain something about humans. We have a saying, the difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. Today, you're about to learn what impossible looks like. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The human fleet didn't charge straight into battle like Lyralii expected. Instead, they did something that seemed completely insane, they scattered. The neat formations broke apart, with human ships flying in every direction, seemingly at random. To anyone watching, it looked like they were fleeing in panic. What are they doing? Commander Theklos asked in confusion. Are they retreating? No, Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. They're hunting. The hegemony commander apparently thought the humans were retreating too, because his fleet began pursuing the scattered ships. It was exactly what any reasonable military commander would do, chase down the fleeing enemy before they could regroup. That was his first mistake.
The second mistake was assuming that human ships followed the same tactical doctrine as every other species in the galaxy. As the hegemony vessels spread out to pursue their targets, the human ships began to change. Weapon ports that had been hidden opened along their hulls. Armor plating shifted and reconfigured. Engine signatures that had been carefully masked suddenly blazed to life. Stealth frigates, Marcus explained as Lyralii watched in fascination. Built to look like cargo haulers or mining ships until they decide to reveal themselves. Very useful for surprise parties. The first hegemony ship to die never even knew what hit it. One moment it was chasing what appeared to be a fleeing human transport. The next moment, that transport had revealed itself to be a warship bristling with weapons, and the hegemony vessel was expanding into a ball of superheated gas. Then, the real battle began. What Lyralii witnessed over the next hour changed everything she thought she knew about warfare. The human ships moved like nothing she had ever seen before. They didn't fight like a traditional fleet, with neat formations and coordinated volleys. They fought like a pack of wolves, constantly moving, constantly adapting, turning the enemy's own size and numbers against them. When hegemony ships tried to bring their superior firepower to bear, the human vessels simply weren't there anymore. They would appear from unexpected angles, strike hard and fast, then disappear back into the void before the enemy could respond. When the hegemony tried to regroup into defensive formations, they found human ships already waiting in their midst, having somehow infiltrated their lines without being detected. How are they doing this? Lyralii asked, watching a human destroyer somehow slip through the middle of a hegemony battle group without being seen. Humans are very good at war, Marcus replied simply. We've had a lot of practice. That was an understatement. As the battle continued, it became clear that the human fleet wasn't just fighting the hegemony. They were teaching them a lesson about the difference between conquest and war. The hegemony was used to fighting species that valued preservation over victory. Most galactic civilizations had reached a point where they preferred to surrender rather than face massive casualties. It was logical, reasonable, and civilized. Humans had apparently never gotten that memo. Admiral Torres to all ships, came the voice over the communication system. Remember, we're not here to destroy them. We're here to make them understand that attacking our allies is a bad idea. Let's make sure the lesson sticks. What followed was perhaps the most one-sided battle in recent galactic history. Not because the humans had superior technology or numbers, but because they fought like their lives depended on every shot, every maneuver, every decision. The hegemony ships were larger and more heavily armed, but they fought like they expected their enemies to behave predictably. When a human ship was damaged, instead of retreating for repairs, it would ram itself into the nearest enemy vessel. When human formations were broken, instead of falling back to regroup, they would split into smaller units that attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. They're not following standard tactical doctrine, Commander Theklos observed, his voice filled with awe and horror. They're improvising everything. That's what humans do, Marcus said. We adapt. When the plan doesn't work, we make a new plan. When the new plan doesn't work, we throw out the concept of planning entirely and just keep fighting until something breaks. Supreme Commander Veltar apparently reached the same conclusion. As Lyralii watched the tactical display, she saw the hegemony fleet beginning to pull back. Ship after ship disengaged from combat and began moving toward the edge of the system. Hegemony flagship, this is Admiral Torres. Are you withdrawing? We are reassessing the tactical situation, came the reply, and Lyralii could hear the frustration and confusion in Veltar's voice. I'll take that as a yes, Admiral Torres said. Here's my reassessment: if you ever threaten our allies again, we won't be as gentle next time. Gentle. Lyralii looked at the tactical display showing dozens of destroyed hegemony vessels, and tried to imagine what a non-gentle human response would look like. She decided she didn't want to know. As the enemy fleet retreated, the human ships began to regroup. But, instead of pursuing the defeated enemy, they took up positions around Zephyr Prime in a defensive formation. Empress Aelin, Admiral Torres's voice filled the throne room again, but now it was warm and respectful. This is Admiral Torres. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Would you like us to escort the hegemony fleet out of your space? The Empress stood and moved to the communication panel. Thank you, Admiral Torres. But I believe they can find their own way out. We appreciate your assistance. Our pleasure, Your Majesty. Marcus, you still have 3 days left on your diplomatic mission. Try not to start any more wars before then. Marcus laughed. I'll do my best, Admiral.
As the communication ended, the throne room fell silent except for the soft humming of the crystal walls. Lyralii stared at the tactical display, watching the blue dots of human ships settling into patrol formations around their world.
That's it, she asked finally. They just leave?
Humans don't conquer, Marcus explained.
We protect. There's a difference. Commander Theklos was studying his instruments with a frown. Ambassador, our sensors are showing some unusual readings from your ships. Their weapon signatures don't match anything in our databases.
Marcus's expression became carefully neutral.
What kind of readings? Energy signatures we've never seen before.
Propulsion systems that seem to violate several laws of physics.
And some of those ships.
He paused, checking his display again. Some of those ships appear to be larger inside than outside.
Classified, Marcus said firmly.
But I can tell you that humans have been very busy since we joined the galactic community. We've learned a lot from our new friends.
Lyralii suddenly understood. You didn't just bring human technology.
You brought technology from every species Earth has alliance with. Marcus neither confirmed nor denied this, but his slight smile was answer enough. Over the next few hours, as the situation stabilized and normal palace operations resumed, Lyralii found herself thinking about what she had witnessed. The hegemony had been the most feared military force in this sector of space. They had conquered dozens of worlds through a combination of overwhelming force and the knowledge that most species would surrender rather than face annihilation. But they had met something they didn't understand, a species that would rather fight impossible odds than bow to threats. A species that turned every battle into a test of will rather than just firepower. You could have told me, she said to Marcus later that evening. They were standing on one of the palace balconies, looking up at the stars where human ships still patrolled.
Told you what? Marcus asked. That you weren't just an ambassador. That you were here to protect us. Marcus considered this. Would it have changed anything? Would you have stopped trying to test me if you'd known? Lyralii thought about it honestly. Probably not. I might have tried even harder.
Then, there was no point in telling you, Marcus said.
Besides, I am an ambassador. Protection is just part of the job description when you're representing humanity.
They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars.
Finally, Lyralii asked the question that had been bothering her all evening. Why us? The Zephyrian Empire is just one world among thousands. Why would Earth send entire fleets to protect us?
Marcus turned to look at her, and his expression was serious.
Because that's what humans do, Princess.
When someone asks for our help, we help them.
When someone threatens our friends, we stand between them and danger. It doesn't matter if it's one person or one planet. We don't abandon people who trust us. Even if it costs you everything?
Especially then, Marcus said softly.
That's when it matters most.
Later that night, as Lyralii lay in her chambers trying to process everything that had happened, she heard voices coming from her mother's private study. Curious, she crept closer to the door and listened.
The hegemony won't try this again anytime soon, Admiral Torres was saying.
Her voice was coming through the communication system.
But there are other threats out there. The Void Seekers have been active in the Rim territories. The Synthetic Collective is expanding again.
And there are rumors about something stirring in the Dark Zone.
We understand, the Empress replied.
Which brings us to the other matter we discussed.
Ah yes, Admiral Torres said, and there was something knowing in her voice. The Guardian assignment. Are you sure about this? It's a big commitment.
I'm sure, the Empress said firmly. After what I've seen today, I'm more certain than ever.
She needs to understand what she'll be responsible for when she takes the throne. And Marcus has agreed? Marcus doesn't know yet, the Empress admitted. But he will. Lyralii frowned, trying to understand what they were talking about. Guardian assignment? What did that mean? The paperwork will be completed within the week, Admiral Torres continued. After that, he'll be officially assigned to your daughter's protection. Personal guard duty, with all that implies. Good, the Empress said. I think they'll be good for each other. He'll teach her about courage and sacrifice. And perhaps she'll teach him that some things are worth protecting for their own sake, not just out of duty. Lyralii backed away from the door, her mind reeling. Marcus was going to be assigned as her personal guardian? For how long? What did that mean exactly? More importantly, why did the idea make her feel excited rather than annoyed? She spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about human stubbornness and impossible odds and the way Marcus had stood ready to defend the palace with his life if necessary. She thought about the story she had heard about human heroes who never gave up, never surrendered, never left anyone behind. And she thought about the fact that soon, she would have her very own human hero watching over her. The next morning brought new challenges. Reports were coming in from across the system about the aftermath of the battle. The hegemony retreat had been so sudden that they had abandoned equipment and personnel on several mining stations. Human ships were conducting rescue operations, picking up survivors and making sure no one was left behind. They're rescuing hegemony soldiers? Commander Theklos asked in amazement. The same people who were trying to conquer us yesterday? Humans don't leave people to die in space, Marcus explained. Even enemies. It's considered bad manners. Lyralii was beginning to understand that humans had a very different definition of many things. She spent most of the day following Marcus around as he coordinated with Zephyrian officials and human ship commanders. She told herself she was just curious about human procedures, but the truth was more complicated. She was trying to figure out how she felt about having a permanent human guardian. Marcus seemed to sense her presence but didn't comment on it. He went about his duties with the same calm efficiency as always, making decisions and giving orders in multiple languages. Lyralii was impressed despite herself at how easily he switched between diplomatic protocols and military communications. Don't you ever get tired? She asked him during a brief break in the afternoon. All the time, Marcus admitted. But there's too much work to do to stop for being tired. Is that another human thing? That's a soldier thing, Marcus corrected. Humans, Zephyrians, probably every species in the galaxy. When people are counting on you, you find the energy somewhere. As evening approached, the Empress called Lyralii to her private chambers. Her mother was sitting by the window, looking out at the stars where human patrol ships moved in slow, protective orbits. Sit down, daughter, the Empress said quietly. We need to talk. Lyralii took a seat across from her mother, trying to look innocent. About what, mother? About Marcus, the Empress said with a knowing smile. And about some changes that are coming to your life. Lyralii's stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. What kind of changes? The Empress was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. You're going to be Empress someday, Lyralii. When that day comes, you'll be responsible not just for our world, but for the safety and well-being of millions of people. It's a responsibility that requires more than just royal blood or political training. What does it require? Lyralii asked, though she thought she was beginning to understand. It requires the kind of courage you saw yesterday, her mother replied. The willingness to stand between your people and those who would harm them, regardless of the cost to yourself. The strength to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. Lyralii nodded slowly. And you think Marcus can teach me that? I think Marcus embodies those qualities, the Empress said. And I think spending time with someone who lives by those principles will help you understand what true leadership means. Before Lyralii could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Enter, the Empress called. Marcus stepped into the chamber, looking slightly confused. Your Majesty? You asked to see me? Yes, the Empress said, standing and moving to her desk. I have something for you.
She picked up an ornate crystal tablet and handed it to Marcus.
Official documentation from the Terran Defense Coalition. Your new assignment.
Marcus read the tablet, his expression growing more puzzled with each line.
I don't understand, Your Majesty. This says I'm being assigned as Princess Lyraliai's personal guardian. Indefinitely.
That's correct, the Empress confirmed. But, I'm a diplomatic attaché, not a bodyguard, Marcus protested. You're whatever Earth needs you to be, the Empress replied with a smile. And, right now, Earth needs you to keep my daughter safe while she learns what it means to be a leader. Lyraliai felt her cheeks flush purple as Marcus turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable, but she thought she detected a hint of amusement in his brown eyes.
Does the princess have any objections to this arrangement? He asked formally.
Lyraliai thought about all the times she had tried to provoke him, all the tests and challenges and attempts to make him lose his composure. She thought about the way he had handled each one with patience and good humor. She thought about watching him stand ready to defend the palace against impossible odds.
No objections, she said quietly.
Good, the Empress said, looking pleased.
Then, it's settled.
Marcus, you'll be provided with quarters in the royal wing. Your duties will include personal protection, security assessment, and educational assistance as needed.
Educational assistance? Marcus asked. Princess Lyraliai is going to be learning about leadership, the Empress explained. Both the theory and the practice.
I suspect she'll benefit from a human perspective on both.
After Marcus left to collect his belongings, Lyraliai remained in her mother's chambers.
How long have you been planning this? She asked.
Since the moment I met him, the Empress admitted.
I knew immediately that he was exactly what you needed. Someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated or impressed by royal status.
Someone who would treat you as a person rather than a princess. And someone who would die to protect me if necessary, Lyraliai added quietly.
Yes, her mother said softly.
But, more importantly, someone who might teach you that there are people worth dying to protect.
That evening, as Lyraliai prepared for sleep, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in weeks.
She had a human guardian now.
Someone who would be around constantly, watching over her, keeping her safe. Someone she could test and challenge and try to understand. Someone who might finally be able to answer all her questions about what made humans so special. As she drifted off to sleep, Lyraliai's last thought was that life was about to become much more interesting. 3 months after Marcus officially became her guardian, Lyraliai had learned several important things about humans. First, they were incredibly difficult to surprise. Second, they had an annoying habit of turning every challenge into a learning experience. Third, they never, ever gave up on anything they considered important. She was currently testing all 3 of these observations in the palace training grounds, where Marcus was attempting to teach her hand-to-hand combat techniques. Again, Marcus said patiently, barely breathing hard despite having just demonstrated a complex fighting sequence for the 15th time. Remember, you're not trying to overpower your opponent. You're trying to use their own momentum against them. Lyraliai wiped sweat from her silver skin and glared at him.
This is pointless. I have telekinetic powers. I don't need to know how to punch people. What happens when your powers don't work?
Marcus asked, settling into a defensive stance.
When would my powers not work? Lyraliai demanded.
Marcus smiled that infuriating calm smile of his. When you're too tired to concentrate. When you're injured. When you're facing an enemy with psionic dampening technology. When you're trying to protect someone and can't risk collateral damage from telekinetic force.
He had an answer for everything.
It was one of his most annoying qualities.
Lyraliai attacked again, trying to catch him off guard with a feint to the left followed by a strike to the right.
Marcus deflected her easily and gently spun her around until she found herself facing away from him with her arm twisted behind her back in a hold that was firm but didn't hurt.
Better, he said, releasing her. You're thinking tactically instead of just reacting. But, you're still telegraphing your moves. How can you possibly know what I'm going to do before I do it? Lyralii asked in frustration.
Experience, Marcus replied.
I've been in more fights than I care to count.
After a while, you learn to read body language, breathing patterns, the way someone shifts their weight before they move. Over the past 3 months, Lyralii had discovered that Marcus had been in a lot of fights. Not just the space battles she had witnessed, but ground combat, ship-to-ship boarding actions, defensive sieges, and operations he referred to only as classified situations. He bore the scars of his experiences in small ways: a slight limp when he was tired, burn marks on his left shoulder, a finger that had been broken and healed slightly crooked.
Why do you do it? She asked suddenly. All the fighting, all the danger. You could have stayed on Earth. You could have chosen a safe career.
Marcus paused in his demonstration of a defensive block.
Because someone has to, he said simply. If the people willing to fight don't fight, then the people willing to hurt others get to do whatever they want. But there must be others who could do it. You don't have to personally take on every threat in the galaxy.
No, Marcus agreed.
But I can take on the ones in front of me. And maybe if I do my job well enough, someone else won't have to face them. It was such a human answer. Lyralii was beginning to understand that humans didn't think in terms of grand cosmic responsibility.
They thought in terms of the specific person in front of them who needed help. The immediate threat that needed to be stopped.
The job that needed to be done today.
Their training session was interrupted by Commander Theklos hurrying into the practice area.
Princess, Ambassador Chen, you need to come to the throne room immediately. There's been a development.
They found the Empress standing before the main communication display, her expression grim. On the screen was Admiral Torres, but she looked different from the confident officer who had defeated the hegemony fleet.
She looked worried.
Your Majesty, Admiral Torres was saying, we've received confirmation from 3 separate intelligence sources.
The Void Seekers are mobilizing. Not just raid parties this time. Their entire fleet. Lyralii felt ice settle in her stomach.
The Void Seekers were a nightmare from the darkest parts of space. They weren't conquerors or pirates. They were exterminators. Their goal wasn't to rule other species, but to eliminate them entirely. They believed the galaxy belonged to the void between stars, and every living thing was a contamination that needed to be cleansed.
How long do we have? The Empress asked.
6 weeks, maybe 8, Admiral Torres replied.
They're moving through the outer rim, destroying everything in their path. No survivors, no prisoners. They're heading for the core systems. And Earth's response? Admiral Torres was quiet for a moment. We're mobilizing everything we have. But, Princess, this isn't like fighting the hegemony. The Void Seekers don't retreat. They don't negotiate. They fight until everything is dead, including themselves if necessary. Marcus stepped forward. Admiral, what are my orders? Continue your current assignment, Admiral Torres said firmly. Princess Lyralii's safety is your top priority.
If the line breaks, if we can't stop them, your job is to get her to the evacuation coordinates.
And if I refuse to evacuate? Lyralii asked quietly. Admiral Torres studied her through the screen for a long moment.
Then, Marcus's job becomes a lot more complicated.
After the communication ended, the throne room fell silent. Lyralii stared at the star map showing the Void Seekers' projected path.
They would hit the major population centers first, then work their way through the smaller systems. Zephyr Prime was on the list, but not near the beginning.
How many people? She asked.
Billions, her mother replied softly. If they succeed, the death toll will be in the hundreds of billions.
And Earth is going to try to stop them? Earth and anyone else willing to fight, Marcus confirmed. The coalition is already sending diplomatic messages to every major power in the galaxy. This isn't about politics or territory anymore. This is about survival.
Over the next few weeks, the palace became a hub of frantic activity. Reports came in daily about the Void Seekers' advance.
World after world went silent as the extermination fleet moved through space like a plague.
Refugee ships began arriving in Zephyr Prime's system, carrying survivors from the outer colonies.
Lyralii threw herself into helping with the refugee crisis, working alongside Marcus to coordinate relief efforts. She learned things about leadership that no classroom had ever taught her. How to make decisions when there were no good options. How to stay calm when everyone around you was panicking. How to give people hope even when you weren't sure you believed it yourself. "You're getting good at this," Marcus observed one evening as they finished organizing housing assignments for a group of families from the Kepler system. "Good at what?" Lyralii asked, exhausted from a 16-hour day of crisis management. "Leading," Marcus replied. "Really leading, not just giving orders." Lyralii looked around at the refugees settling into temporary shelters, at the volunteers distributing food and medical supplies, at the complex web of logistics and compassion that had somehow emerged from chaos. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That's exactly what leadership is," Marcus said softly. But their work was interrupted by increasingly dire news from the front lines. The human fleet was fighting valiantly, but the Void Seekers were unlike any enemy anyone had faced before. Their ships were living things, grown rather than built, that could regenerate damage and adapt to enemy tactics in real time. They fought with the single-minded determination of a cancer destroying healthy tissue. "3 more systems have gone dark," Commander Theklos reported during one of the daily briefings. "The Coalition fleet is being pushed back on all fronts." "What about the other galactic powers?" the Empress asked. "Surely they understand that this threatens everyone?" "Some are helping," Marcus replied, reading reports from his communication device. "The Altarians have committed their entire merchant marine to refugee operations. The Crystalline Collective is sharing defensive technologies. The hegemony." He paused. "The hegemony is fortifying their core worlds and refusing to engage." Lyralii felt a surge of disgust. "They're going to let everyone else die and hope the Void Seekers burn themselves out before reaching hegemony space?" "It's not an unreasonable strategy," Marcus said diplomatically. "If you only care about your own people." "But you don't," Lyralii said. It wasn't a question. "No," Marcus agreed. "Humans tend to think in terms of our people rather than my people. The circle keeps expanding until it includes everyone worth protecting." As the weeks passed, that philosophy was put to an increasingly desperate test. The Void Seekers were moving faster than predicted, their bioships growing stronger with each victory. The human fleet was taking devastating casualties, but they kept fighting, kept buying time for evacuation operations. Then came the news that changed everything. "The Tau Ceti system has fallen," Admiral Torres reported during an emergency communication. Her face was grim, and Lyralii could see battle damage in the background behind her. "The Void Seekers have broken through our primary defensive line. They'll reach the core systems within 2 weeks." "What are your orders for the Zephyr system?" the Empress asked. "Begin immediate evacuation," Admiral Torres replied. "Priority Alpha. Essential personnel and the royal family first." "No," Lyralii said suddenly. Everyone in the throne room turned to look at her. "I'm not abandoning our people." "Princess," Admiral Torres said gently, "this isn't about abandoning anyone. This is about preserving continuity of government. If the Zephyrian royal line survives, the empire can be rebuilt someday." "What empire?" Lyralii demanded. "If we run away and let our people die, what exactly are we preserving? A title? A bloodline? Those things are meaningless if the civilization they represent is dead." The Empress looked at her daughter with surprise and something that might have been pride. "What are you suggesting, Lyralii?" "I'm suggesting we fight," Lyralii said firmly. "Not just the military. Everyone. If the Void Seekers want to destroy us, let's make them work for it." Marcus stepped forward. "Princess, with respect, the Zephyrian military isn't equipped for this kind of warfare. Your ships are designed for patrol and peacekeeping, not fighting bioorganic nightmares from the void." "Then, we improvise," Lyralii replied. "Isn't that what humans do? When the plan doesn't work, you make a new plan?" Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then began to smile. "You've been listening." "I've been learning," Lyralii corrected. From a very good teacher. What followed was the most intensive 2 weeks of Lyraliai's life.
Under Marcus's guidance, she helped transform the Zephyrian Defense Force from a traditional military into something much more dangerous, an organized resistance movement. They turned merchant ships into improvised weapons platforms. They trained civilian volunteers in guerrilla tactics. They prepared hidden supply caches throughout the system and planned for a fighting retreat that would make every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space debris a potential battleground. The goal isn't to win, Marcus explained to a gathering of ship captains and civilian leaders. The goal is to make them pay for every inch of space they take. To slow them down, to hurt them, to make them remember that this system fought back. And, if we all die in the process, one of the captains asked bluntly.
Then, we die standing up, Lyraliai answered before Marcus could speak.
We die protecting our homes and our people. And, maybe, just maybe, we give the rest of the galaxy time to organize a real defense. When the Void Seekers finally arrived at Zephyr Prime, they found something they had never encountered before, a prey species that refused to run. The battle began in the outer system, where modified mining ships engaged the biofleet in running fights among the asteroid belts. The Zephyrian vessels were outgunned and outnumbered, but they fought with desperate creativity, using their knowledge of local space to set up ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. Lyraliai watched the battle from the Palace Command Center, coordinating defensive efforts while Marcus managed communications with the various resistance cells. Every report that came in told the same story: the Void Seekers were advancing, but slowly, and they were taking casualties they had never expected. They're adapting to our tactics faster than we hoped, Commander Theklos reported. Their bioships are learning from each engagement. Then, we change tactics faster than they can adapt, Lyraliai replied. What about the civilian evacuation ships? The last transport left 6 hours ago, Marcus confirmed. Everyone who wanted to leave is gone. And everyone who stayed? Marcus checked his reports. 43,000 civilians volunteered for the defense force. They're spread throughout the system in hidden positions. 43,000 people who had chosen to stay and fight rather than flee to safety. Lyraliai felt a surge of pride mixed with terrible responsibility. These people were counting on her to lead them, to give their sacrifice meaning. The fighting continued for 3 days. The Void Seekers pushed steadily inward, their bioships adapting to each new tactic the defenders employed. But they paid for every victory. For every Zephyrian ship they destroyed, they lost one of their own. For every defensive position they overran, they left more of their forces dead in space. On the 4th day, the surviving Void Seeker fleet reached Zephyr Prime itself. Planetary bombardment in 30 minutes, Commander Theklos reported. All defensive platforms are either destroyed or compromised. Lyraliai looked around the command center at the faces of the people who had chosen to stay. Soldiers and civilians, Zephyrians and refugees from other worlds, all united by the decision to make their stand here. Marcus, she said quietly. Do you regret staying? Marcus didn't hesitate. Never. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though we're going to lose? We're not going to lose, Marcus said firmly. We're going to die fighting. There's a difference. Before Lyraliai could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. But these weren't the warning alarms they had been hearing for days. These were different. Massive energy signatures detected at the edge of the system, Commander Theklos called out, his voice filled with disbelief. Multiple fleets jumping out of hyperspace. The tactical display lit up with new contacts. Not just a few ships, but hundreds. Thousands. Human vessels, yes, but also Altarian cruisers, crystalline collective dreadnoughts, and ships from species Lyraliai didn't even recognize. This is Admiral Torres to all Zephyr defenders, came the welcome voice over the communication system. Sorry we're late. We had to stop and pick up some friends. What emerged from hyperspace was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Every species that valued freedom over extinction had contributed ships to what the humans were calling the Final Stand Fleet. Even some former enemies had joined the alliance, recognizing that survival trumped old grudges. The Battle of Zephyr Prime lasted 18 hours and
would be remembered as the turning point in the war against the Void Seekers. The biofleet that had seemed unstoppable found itself facing an enemy that had learned from their earlier defeats. The combined fleet fought with human stubbornness, Altarian precision, crystalline adaptability, and the desperate courage of a dozen other species. When the last Void Seeker bioship died in the fires of its own collapse, the galaxy had learned something important about unity in the face of extinction. Later, as rescue and recovery operations began throughout the system, Lyralii found herself standing once again on the palace balcony with Marcus. The night sky was filled with ships from across the galaxy, former strangers working together to help the survivors. "I learned something these past few months," she said quietly. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "That being a guardian isn't just about protecting one person," she said. "It's about protecting everything that person represents. Everyone they care about. Everything they're responsible for." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a hard lesson to learn. But an important one," Lyralii continued. "Especially for someone who's going to be responsible for an entire world someday." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars and the ships that moved among them. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "So what happens now?" "The immediate threat is over. Your mother could probably request a new guardian if she wanted." Lyralii turned to look at him, and she was surprised to realize that the idea of Marcus leaving filled her with something very close to panic. "Do you want to leave?" "No," Marcus said softly. "But I want you to understand what you're asking. Having a human guardian isn't temporary. We don't give up on people we're protecting. Ever." "Good," Lyralii said firmly. "Because I have a lot more to learn about leadership, and I can't think of anyone better to learn it from." Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since she had known him, it was completely unguarded. "In that case, Your Highness, I should probably mention something." "What?" "Human guardians don't just protect their charges from external threats," he said carefully. "We also protect them from making stupid decisions, taking unnecessary risks, and generally getting themselves killed through poor judgment." Lyralii laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the balcony. "Are you saying you're going to spend the rest of your life keeping me out of trouble?" "Someone has to," Marcus replied with mock seriousness. "And I'm apparently the human who drew that particular assignment." "Lucky you," Lyralii said, grinning. "Lucky me," Marcus agreed. Years later, when Lyralii became empress and faced the countless challenges that came with ruling an interstellar empire, she would always remember the lessons she learned during those desperate weeks. That leadership meant standing between your people and those who would harm them. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was refuse to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. And she would remember that she had learned those lessons from a human who had traveled across the galaxy to protect a princess who had started out just trying to make him lose his temper. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of threats that would require constant vigilance and occasional desperate stands against impossible odds. But it was also a place where different species could work together, where enemies could become allies, where a teasing princess and her patient guardian could help hold the line against the darkness. And sometimes, when the situation was desperate enough and the stakes were high enough, that was more than sufficient. The human Marcus Chen had come to Zephyr Prime as an ambassador and stayed as a guardian. But, in the end, he had become something more important, proof that the most powerful force in the galaxy wasn't superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It was the refusal to abandon people who counted on you, no matter what the cost. That, more than any weapon or fleet, was what made the difference between survival and extinction. And that was a lesson worth learning, whether you were human, Zephyrian, or any of the countless other species trying to build something better among the stars. The princess had teased the human hero, not knowing that he would become the foundation upon which she would build her understanding of what it truly meant to protect and serve others. It was, everyone agreed, a very human way for the story to end, not with conquest or glory, but with the simple decision to stand guard over the people and principles that mattered most. And, in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, that was the most wonderful thing of all.